we have people from across the country calling us constantly now, whether it's, think tank leaders or media wanting to know what's happening in Louisiana, and it's nice to be able to tell the story. Most recently, when the nation's report card came out about 3 weeks ago, Louisiana has moved up to rank 32nd in the country. I'm a native of Louisiana, and so for me, that's even hard to believe because we've been conditioned to think we have to be last, or we might slip into that 49th position. So for us to be threatened in the country it's a bit wild.
And Dr. Brumley,
it's great.
Just for the benefit of our audience, where were we ranked before you assumed your leadership position?
I'm coming up on 5 years in my role. In 2019, Louisiana was ranked 49th in the country. In 2022, we were ranked 43 or 44, and today we're ranked 32. Most interesting about some of the latest results, Louisiana has led the country in reading growth for 2 consecutive cycles of the nation's report card. We're now in the top 5 for math growth. Students with disabilities are not only outgrowing their peers across the nation, but our students with disabilities have higher proficiency rates than students across the country. And the same is true for students from low-income homes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Well, good morning, everyone. Right here at the top of the day, I want to wish everyone a very happy Kash Patel Day. He should be officially confirmed today, but just to make sure we get him over the finish line, please go to LACAG.org and send Senator Cassidy and Kennedy a final encouragement, even a thank you in advance, because I believe they both agreed to have indicated they'll be voting for him, but it never hurts to apply some positive pressure. So go over there and do that.
Action Center to the Action Center.
Okay. And that was the housekeeping note for this morning. And on to our guests now. Joining us today is a man who is a hero for our state in my eyes. We have with us today Louisiana Superintendent of Education, Dr. Cade Brumley. Dr. Brumley, before we start talking to you, I'm going to read the scripture of the day. It is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 12. And it says, "The confidence of my calling enables me to overcome every difficulty without shame, for I have an intimate revelation of this God. And my faith in him convinces me that he is more than able to keep all that I have placed in his hands safe and secure until the fullness of his appearing." And as I was reading this morning, Paul wrote these letters to Timothy while he was in prison. So it was a very dark time when he was literally bound in chains. And the confidence he had in his calling enabled him to overcome every difficulty without shame. This is why it's so important that we not only know the Lord and have an intimate, ongoing relationship with him, but we have to understand and live in the calling he's placed on our lives. Because when difficulties come to us in that position or role, we need to be assured beyond the shadow of a doubt that he has called us there. He has placed us there, and he will ensure that our work succeeds even when circumstances make it so that we seem helpless to move it forward ourselves.
You know who else, Danielle, has great confidence in their calling is Dr. Cade Brumley, who's here with us today, Louisiana Education Superintendent. Dr. Brumley, what a pleasure to have you with us today, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. And, it's most appropriate, Danielle, reading the scripture that she did, because one of the things I do is I start my day every morning in prayer. And I'm not one of those guys that says, hey, I'm going to pray for you. And then, I don't do it. So like I am very committed to, if I tell someone, hey, I'm going to pray for you, I don't want to be inauthentic in that. And so I want to do that. And so, we do that every day. I pray for the students across the state of Louisiana, pray for teachers, safety. And also I pray, obviously I pray for myself that, people can see Christ through me as appropriate, and that the Lord would help me, be successful in the work. And, I think that so much of the work that we've done in the state of Louisiana over the last few years, obviously it's taken a strong policy, it's taken strong stands, it's taken the work of teachers and parents, moms and dads, kids, etc. But I do believe like God's hand has been on the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, I believe that too. And based upon some of the things we're seeing, Dr. Brumley, your prayers have been efficacious. It looks like according to the national stats, Louisiana is steadily improving, particularly in the area of reading, which is so important in order to be able to be successful in any facet of life, to be proficient in reading. What do you attribute that to under your leadership?
Well, look, we have people from across the country calling us constantly now, whether it's, think tank leaders or media wanting to know what's happening in Louisiana, and it's nice to be able to tell the story. Most recently, when the nation's report card came out about 3 weeks ago, Louisiana has moved up to rank 32nd in the country. I'm a native of Louisiana. And so for me, that's even hard to believe because we've been conditioned to think we have to be last, or we might slip into that 49th position. So for us to be second in the country is it's a bit wild,
And
but
Dr. Brumley,
it's great.
just for the benefit of our audience, where were we ranked before you assumed your leadership position?
Well, we were in 2019. So I was hired at the very beginning of 2020. So I'm coming up on 5 years in my role. In 2019, Louisiana was ranked 49th in the country. In 2022, we were ranked 43 or 44, and today we're ranked 32. Most interesting about some of the latest results, Louisiana has led the country in reading growth for 2 consecutive cycles of the nation's report card. We're now in the top 5 for math growth. Students with disabilities are not only outgrowing their peers across the nation, but our students with disabilities have higher proficiency rates than students across the country. And the same is true for students from low-income homes. So someone asked me, they said, were you expecting those results? And I said, yeah, I was, because it tracks with our internal data. And I always acknowledge teachers first and the work that they do, because none of that's possible without, staffing and making sure that kids have access to high quality teachers. But it's not them alone. It's policy leaders. It's groups like yours that are pushing in to make sure that schools are doing what they're ordained to do and not chasing other shiny radical things potentially. It's having a strong governor, a strong legislature, a strong state board. And so we can't take any of this for granted, and we can't retreat on progress. And so we have to keep pushing forward with the comprehensive reforms that we've put in place, because still, even with Louisiana's growth, still too many kids can't read on grade level. Too many kids, can't do math, and too many kids are stuck in a school that's failing them.
Yeah. Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge Parish Chapter is dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend and take back their parental rights at all levels of government. To learn more or to get involved with Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge, email momsforlibertybatonrouge@gmail.com. That's moms, the number 4, libertybatonrouge@gmail.com. The email address is on the Patriot page of our website, freedomstate.us, and it's in the show notes. And Dr. Brumley, you mentioned chasing after shiny things. Your emphasis has been on elementary schools getting back to the basics of academic learning. Would you talk about your philosophy and the approach that you're directing to the schools across the state?
Well, school systems, states, et cetera, have tried to do things they were never ordained to do. School systems were never intended to be the family. They were never intended to be the hospital or the restaurant. And so naturally, they're not good at it. And so what we need to do is just make sure that with the resource that we have available, in elementary school, you're teaching kids to read, you're teaching them to do math, you're teaching them to understand and appreciate their country. And as you move into high school, you're making sure that you're creating pathways of opportunity for the parent and the child where they're graduating either ready to go to college or ready to go to work or ready to go in the military or civic service. We are, while other places might be trying to do more, we're trying to narrow the scope of education and focus on a few priorities that we think are most important.
Yeah.
And those are educational.
Absolutely. Educational and academic. Dr. Brumley, you've lived through the Biden administration, and now we have the Trump administration. Notwithstanding your views generally about the Department of Education federally, and we'll get into that, it looks as though the federal government and the Department of Education, President Trump, are actually supporting now your philosophical approach to education. How important is that you're not having to worry at this point about being undermined by a radical leftist federal government that seems to be constantly at odds with your focus and your approach?
Yeah. I mean, look, the last 4 years, there certainly was an alignment. Specifically, we can talk about issues like Title IX, where the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Agriculture work together to impose radical gender ideology on schools. If you don't comply, we're taking lunch money from poor kids, or we're taking away funding for communities that are struggling. We can talk about the ways in which they tried to restrict the growth of public charter schools and restrict the growth of parents' choice. We can talk about the way in which they've done a number of things, or attempted to do a number of things, to be distraction. Hell, we got letters from them about gun control. And I'm like, what in the world does this have to do with anything relative to teaching a kid to read or do math? And so we're really excited about the way in which we think the U.S. Department of Ed will go. I have a relationship with Linda McMahon. I think she's a competent executive, and I think she will be very successful in the role. I think what we'll see out of a Trump administration in terms of education is, focusing on parents' choice, focusing on fundamental academic excellence, and respecting the sovereignty of states. And I think all of that is good. There's a broader question around closing the Department of Education, and count me in that number. But, I know and appreciate that there has to be certain congressional actions for that to happen. But along the way, I just feel like they're going to be more aligned with what the majority of the people in the state of Louisiana also believe to be true.
Love that Linda McMahon was put in that job just for the optics of someone from the WWE going in to destroy the Department of Education.
Yeah,
I can see her
But
walking
look, I
in
mean,
and
she is.
pillaging the offices in the Department of Education.
There are so many wrestling like comments that can be made, and that we can throw around. She's going to body slam this and suplex that, which is all good. But look, she's my time that I've had to engage with her, she has been delightful. She has been committed to restoring a pursuit for excellence. And I'm thankful I've had the opportunity to push in with this incoming administration and talk about the things that are most important. And so, for whatever reason, I've been blessed with a kind of a seat at that table to talk about some of the most important things that I think they should be doing. And I think that we're going to be in a better place as a result of the work that they intend to do.
Do you have any indication from your seat at that table on what the ultimate closure of DOE will mean for the direction of funding and some of the initiatives that DOE has picked up over the years that perhaps is not really their role to be doing anyway?
Yeah, I mean, there are organizations that even have put together white papers on how exactly you dismantle the Department of Education in a thoughtful way, one that does not create chaos. And so I think that they will look towards some of that. I think they're going to look to states that are leading and say, how exactly do we do this? How this is generally what we want to accomplish at 50,000 feet. What does this look like at 10 feet? And I think that they're going to seek out that type of information to do the work. And if you look at some of their most recent actions, I think it speaks to that. Most recently, they provided the Dear Colleague letter that says, look, we are not interested in having funding for DEI in K12 or higher education across the country. And guess what? We are not only saying we don't want it, we're going to come back in 2 weeks and check to see if you still have it. And so, I was able from that to pen a letter to school systems across the state of Louisiana and amplify that message and simply say and suggest to them that they need to work to make sure that their practices are not discriminatory and that we are looking at things based on the merit of student achievement and the merit of an individual applying for a job or the merit of someone applying for admission, and not put on particular lenses around demographics to make those decisions. And so I think that that's some of the movement you're going to see. And if someone wants to attack me because I believe merit matters, then, I guess just bring that on. We'll have a philosophical debate.
Yeah, well, I saw your letter, Dr. Brumley, and if they're going to attack you on that, they might as well attack Martin Luther King, because your approach in that letter was exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King believed and expressed, that we're to evaluate, promote, and judge people based upon their content and their merit and not on their race or any other extraneous factor. So your position is absolutely well-grounded and not only in natural law, but in really consistent with the greatest African-American moral teacher in the last 100 years, Dr. Martin Luther King. So I applaud you for that. Getting back for a second to the Department of Education, if the federal government and McMahon does what it looks as though they may do, which is to try to return so much of the educational priorities and emphasis and administration to the states, ultimately the Department of Education may become something that's not necessary in the country if this is done the right way. Because, as you've emphasized, the best people to administer education are those on the very local and on the state level. And so perhaps it's an issue that may ultimately take care of itself.
Yeah, I think so. I think that they have an approach where they can thoughtfully deconstruct that particular agency. I'll just give you an example. One of the not so secret secrets is that the U.S. Department of Education is in many ways just a large bank. They house all of the student loan and Pell Grants, and they administer those types of programs. Well, to me, it makes no sense for them to have that. That needs to go somewhere like Treasury, where you have finance experts doing that work. And further, there's a broader question around, should the public be issuing loans for education, and should that be a function of the private sector altogether? And so I just think that there are ways in which they can thoughtfully reconsider the approach as the president moves towards ed not necessarily existing formally as an agency.
Yeah. That's a great point. I want to talk for a minute, Cade, about this recent legislative fiscal auditor report that came out. The Department of Education was one of the agencies that was cited in that report. And apparently, according to this report, Department of Education overreported $2.3 billion in federal child nutrition grants and misclassified the date supposedly of nearly $1 million in education stabilization funds, and did not properly document La Carte and travel card expenses. Now, you've given a very clear response to this. Your department has, that this was essentially a coding error and it did not affect funding at all. Talk about that report, and so we can allow our listeners to get some clarity on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're willing to stand for the things that we do well and appreciate those applause. And also we're willing to hear criticism when something doesn't go right within the agency that I lead. And so in last year's audit, and keep in mind, my agency that I lead, we oversee nearly $7 billion a year.
Wow.
So I have a team that I lead that oversees about $7 billion annually. And I think we do that well. One of the examples of doing that well is during the COVID time, when all of the additional federal dollars were coming in to the states. We didn't hire additional people for that. We managed that on their own. We made a dashboard for the public where they could go in to the state and each local school system and determine where spending was occurring. And in fact, we've already closed out those practices with all of those dollars where the U.S. Department of Education is having to help other states understand what to do. So we have a really strong team around this. But in the last annual audit of our agency, they called out $2 billion in over-reporting in a food and nutrition service fund. And so, I was telling someone that this is oftentimes what makes public service difficult for good people in, say, like our finance team, because when that's reported, some people are going to think, well, my goodness, who stole $2 billion in the Department of Education, or who mismanaged $2 billion? That's absolutely not what's true. What's true is in roughly 2011, a new reporting requirement came about from the federal government. And when the initial programmers came in at the Louisiana Department of Education back in 2011, they set the code, the computer code, to report that cumulatively. So it would take month one, and then when they reported month two, they would add month 1 and 2 and send that as a total. Well, 15 years later, it was determined that that should have just been reported each month as singular month. And so what the Louisiana Department of Education did over 15 years is every month we reported a sum total of all the spending over the 15-year period instead of just every single month. And so the U.S. Department of Agriculture never caught it. We ended up catching it ourselves and saying, hey, this is a mistake. We need to correct for that. So it was simply a reporting issue. No funds were mismanaged. Just on the paperwork that was sent in due to a computer program, we were reporting a cumulative dollar amount instead of just simply the month-to-month amount.
Yeah.
And how beautiful is it going to be to never have to report to the federal government again?
Yeah, I get it. And look, I don't want to minimize it. Like we want to be held accountable for things, and I certainly do, and we've got to get better. But when you have people that suggest that something like that is a significant problem, like it's a nothing burger. It is the fact that the department, instead of reporting just what was spent per month, the department, as a result of a computer program code, simply summed that amount over 15 years and kept reporting it as a sum. So It is what it is. We're happy
it's unfortunate,
to take
Dr. Brumley. It's unfortunate because it's misleading. It's unfortunate because it's inaccurate, and it allows people to make inferences and conclusions that simply are not true. I mean, you could make a strong argument that this should not even belong in this report. Now, to his credit, the auditor did give you an opportunity to respond to it, and that your response is there. But there's a strong argument to be made that this shouldn't even be in this report because of a very simple explanation for it. But either way, we certainly understand your explanation for it, and I know our listeners will as well.
Chris, I feel bad for members of my team on finance that are doing hard work every single day. And these are people that could go into private practice and extend their salary, but they're choosing this life of public service. And so they're having to answer for this issue that truly is not anything at all other than a coding error that reported a sum total instead of a monthly total.
Yeah. Unfortunate. Dr. Brumley, is our state still receiving COVID money for education? How much money has the education department received in the past? Where is it? And where are we on that issue now?
Yeah, well, this speaks to even the new U.S. Department of Education. They've sent out guidance that they want to streamline and make more effective the use of these COVID dollars that have flowed out over the last few years. I mean, essentially $4 billion here in our state alone, but across the country, tremendous amounts of money. So the U.S. Department of Ed now is sending out guidance on the way in which they want this information reported and the way in which they want these dollars utilized. Well, to our team's credit, we have already utilized the dollars. We've already closed out the books, and we've already reported. So everything that they are suggesting that they want to do now in the new administration in terms of the COVID dollars, we've been doing, and we've already done, and we're closing the books. So that really is not going to apply to us. I think the COVID dollars for schools in the very beginning were helpful to make sure that you could go back to school. You could get in the schools. Now, unfortunately, you have some states that they didn't send kids back to school for a year and a half. Yeah. Well, in Louisiana, we used the dollars that we had to create sanitary environments where kids could go back to school. And so I think that we've used the resource well. We had a study that came out 2 weeks ago from Stanford and Harvard called the Ed Recovery Scorecard, and it tracked every state, the way in which they utilized their COVID funding and the academic status of the kids in those states. And Louisiana was the only state in the country where kids, the average Louisiana student had rebounded and overcome any deficit relative to COVID. And so we think that we've used the money wisely. We've done our best to be good stewards. I know we've done a good job of making that information available to the public through our dashboards. And certainly there are lessons to be learned about how to manage healthcare situations moving forward and the role in which the government should and should not play.
Yeah. And one of the things, excuse me for just a second, Danielle, one of the things I have to point out here that you did, Dr. Brumley, that has allowed our students to overcome those deficits caused by COVID was your push to end the quarantine for our students and to get them back in the classroom. And if you had not fought so hard on that, we may well still be trying to overcome these academic deficits.
Yeah, and I am still employed. That was, I would go home and tell my wife I'm probably getting fired tomorrow. Just FYI.
We're grateful you haven't been.
Back. Yeah, we pushed back. What I was hearing in talks with families is that we had some families across the state that their kids were being quarantined for like 2 and 3 weeks at a time over and over and over again. And whenever I looked at data, I would even look at CDC data. And the CDC was affirming what I was saying. More kids going to the hospital for mental health, juvenile diabetes on the rise, suicide attempts increasing, weight gain in children. And so all of these negative health things were happening. And these same people, such as CDC, were saying, well, continue to keep people home. The same people at Louisiana Department of Health at the time keep quarantining children. And so we just said, to heck with that. That's not right. Never in the history of our country have we quarantined well people. And so we're going to stop that. And so we put that back in the power of the parents. You know, I was called reckless. I was told I had blood on my hands. And certainly COVID impacted people. And certainly it impacted certain subgroups more than others with certain conditions. But overwhelmingly, it was not impacting children to the extent that we should shut down the school system. And so that's what we did. We kept it open. And so when the nation's report card came out in 2022, and we saw that growth from 49 in 2019 to 43, et cetera, in 2022, we had grown in literacy rates. Our fourth graders were reading at a higher level in 2022 than 2019. But also there were so many other states that were just falling. And so that kind of pushed us up in the rankings. But when the rankings came out this time in 24 or 25 as a result of the 24 nations report card, it was a result in Louisiana of us moving academically in all the content areas, but also you continue to see some of the states fall.
Dr. Brumley, you said that a lot of the students on the whole in the state have really caught up from COVID. Obviously, the southern part of the state was hit very hard by some hurricanes, Hurricane Ida, and I know there were some in Lake Charles, I believe, as well. Have the students in those hurricane-affected areas caught up to the extent?
It's Laura, it's Delta, it's Ida, it's Zeta. We've had so many named storms over the last few years that educators and families have had to deal with. They've done a really good job. Our agency has just tried to play a supporting role here, encouragement around whatever we can do to get kids back in school safely, whatever we can do to help return teachers to their homes and to their environments. We wanted to do those things. And it has, we've been fairly successful in that. But, I haven't been the guy out there having to haul around commodities or try to get a light back on. But there have been people doing that work, and they've done a really good job of it. And that's what's further complicated the educational system in Louisiana over the last few years. It just hasn't been the pandemic. It's been, these hurricanes. It's been ice storms in North Louisiana. It's been a fractured state government. And so having to navigate all of these different issues has been a really, really difficult challenge. But I'm biased, but I think history will show that we've managed it well here within the Department of Education.
Yeah.
Great. I hope so too. I believe it will be.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information.
You know, all eyes have been on all things fiscal these last few weeks, with Elon Musk and Doge being at the head on every headline. I mean, leading every news report. And Governor Landry has established a sort of Doge task force for the state of Louisiana as well to take a look at state funding. Have you been directed to look for areas of cuts at your department as well?
Yeah, we have, and we've actually reduced some of our expenditures over the last few years. What we were directed this particular cycle, both from the governor's office and through some legislative leadership, is to look at ways to cut 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5% of spending. And so what I had the opportunity to do is to appear before a House Appropriations panel at the state capitol and show the way in which that we have already reduced, but the ways that we could even do that moving forward at those various rates. And so that was a good exercise to do. I was able to pull my whole team in and think about ways to be more efficient and effective. And I think those are just positive things to do from time to time, because we have to remember we are managing the public's dollar, but we also are managing the public's trust. And so it's really important that we do what we're supposed to do with dollars.
Do you have any indication on whether the state as a whole will take a look differently at expenditures? Meaning, this concept that we've had for years and years on end, that if you don't use it, you lose it. Is there going to be a different approach taken that would incentivize savings over spending?
Yeah, I hope so. And, I won't necessarily be making those decisions, but we want to be a part of whatever tabletop activities or otherwise that helps Louisiana be more frugal. But the other part about that I think is really important is not just talking about cuts. We need more conversation and we need more action on how can we make this economy more robust,
Yeah.
so that we have more dollars that flow into families and flow into homes and flow into businesses and even to provide for better roads and better schools and those types of things. And so I talk about a good bit the fact that over the last 10 years, public school enrollment has declined by about 5%. And sometimes people will suggest, well, that's all because of poor things happening in the public school. And I say, well, wait, schools have to get better. The public school enrollment decline mirrors the decline of the state of Louisiana as a whole. And what I find even more problematic is while public school enrollment has declined by about 5%, private school enrollment has declined by about 11% over the same period of time. So that tells me, yes, education has to be better, but also more families aren't here to begin with. But also families aren't necessarily able to access private education anymore because the economy isn't what it needs to be.
So well,
it's economic. It's jobs. It's the insurance rates have to go down. It's access to healthcare that makes sense. It's a combination of things. It's crime. And I just don't think the state can just continue to talk about it. We have to have action. And I appreciate some of the movements that I'm seeing on these fronts. But and I know I'm the superintendent of education, but I'll tell you, I don't know how we continue to grow when families can't afford car insurance, or your insurance on your home doubles overnight. And so it's a real concern in the state. And so I think that we need to encourage policymakers and the executive branch to continue their work in trying to tackle these issues, because education doesn't necessarily create the economy, and the economy doesn't necessarily create education, but they have to work hand in hand. Yeah. And Louisiana is the only state in the South that has seen over the last few years a decline in population, while some of the other Southern states are seeing this Southern Renaissance. And I want to be part of that. I want us to be a part of it.
One of the things, Dr. Brumley, that I've noticed that distinguishes Louisiana, not in a good way, from other states, is it seems like when you look at Mississippi, you look at Florida, you look at South Carolina, Tennessee, the leaders there, and I'm not saying we don't have some good leaders in elected positions here, we do, but it seems as though we're doing a lot of cutting around the edges here, and we're not really hacking at the root of the fiscal inefficiency, the bloated government, and it's as though too many of our leaders want to make decisions without making tough decisions, without offending people, without doing things that are going to require significant adverse consequences in the short term for people in state government. And we're looking forward to seeing some tough decisions that have to be made if we're ever going to get to a point where we need to be. We cannot have our cake and eat it too anymore in the state of Louisiana. You've had to make tough decisions, and we need leaders in this state who are willing to make the hard decisions to get our state out of the rut that we're in, and stop cutting around the edges of these issues. And it's quite frustrating, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, and I think the role that your particular organization plays and the role that this podcast can serve is, you really do have some legislative champions. You have some strong individuals in the executive branch. And so when they do those things that are tough, helping to tell their story and amplifying that work so that they don't feel like they are alone or that they are isolated in doing the hard things. And so you guys have done that for individuals across government. And I think that's good. And I think that's helpful.
Yeah. We've been told a number of times, Dr. Brumley, that it always helps. We agree with you to have citizens aligned with the legislative leaders and the elected leaders so that they do feel buttressed and fortified in what they're doing. Everybody needs that in life, and elected leaders are certainly included in that. Well, Dr. Brumley, before we let you go today, I want to remind our listeners that on Tuesday, we will have Aaron Harrell on our show. We had Jeremy Harrell on recently, who is the former Army veteran who's been prosecuted by the federal government, probably has already begun serving a jail sentence for simply trying to do good for others in his nonprofit. But his wife will come on, and unfortunately, and I hope this doesn't happen, Danielle may have jury duty next week. And if she does, then we will have to postpone that show, but she may have to go do her civic duty. But we're certainly hoping that we'll be here on Tuesday for that interesting show. Dr. Brumley, I got to tell you, man, we're lucky to have you in the state of Louisiana. I've been so impressed with your leadership, the things that you've done to bring this state forward. And I'm just looking forward to seeing where we go. And I know you well enough to know that your goal is for us to be number one in the country. I know that's your goal. And if anybody can get us there, you can do it. God bless your effort.
Thank you. And look, I want to be very clear too. Like we're answering calls from across the country on our progress. But it's hard to get arrogant when too many kids still can't read and do math, and parents aren't fully in the driver's seat, and teachers aren't elevated. So, I don't want anyone to take, the comments that I make about our progress and believe that it's not true, that we still don't have a ton of work to do, because across this space we do, and we are focused on doing the work, and we appreciate all the support that we can get around that.
Thank you for joining us.
God bless, guys.
God bless you.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit LACAG.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.